Hamlet, sorry, I don't agree with Indiana Jones, Wish, and Napoleon being above stuff like Believer or the Meg 2. Well, I'm sorry that you don't agree. I didn't see any of these movies. What do you mean you didn't see any of those movies? How do you know? What? Hamilton, I'm going to, listen. We can agree to disagree, but you just kind of totally cut the legs out under your point. It's like, I didn't see these movies, but I'm going to disagree with you anyway. What? Huh? Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I didn't see him, but I disagree. Oh, I need a drink. You made me want a drink. I gotta get a drink. Hold on. Well, now, my friends, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna move on to the next part of my show, and that is my top 10 worst movies of 2023 with honorable mentions. Now, listen, I just finished doing my top 10 best movies list yesterday. Thankfully, I was able to see a lot of great movies this year. A lot of great movies. I think along with my honorable mentions, there was like 25 or 26 films that I'm like, wow, these were really great, or these really impressed me. They had fantastic direction and writing and storytelling and acting, and just, these people's imaginations just were on full display. And I was like, yeah, even though I thought maybe the year might have been like a little rough at some point, being able to, go through my backlog and check out some other smaller pictures and also some kind of big pictures that maybe went under the radar for some people, right? It turned out to be, a pretty solid year for film. However, there were a number of stinkers, in my opinion, some major disappointments, some movies that I was looking forward to, and other movies that I was like, well, I don't have really any expectations. My expectations are probably subterranean. Maybe they'll be good, and they turned out to be horrible. And even with my subterranean expectations, my subterranean expectations, I was still disappointed. So, but I like I said, I enjoy talking about the worst movies because, again, I want these filmmakers and these writers and these actors and everyone else in between to learn from their mistakes. Will they? Probably not. But maybe they will, Chad. Maybe they'll come across my video like, you know what? He made a good point. Or these people make a good point. We'll see. But before we get to my top 10 worst movies of 2023, I want to start with my honorable mentions. And these aren't really in any particular order. Maybe like the last couple. I would say like the last couple. Maybe they originally were definitely on my top 10 worst list, but I have to kick them off because there happened to be worse movies that came out that I saw. But starting off with a film that I was actually looking forward to and was sadly disappointed by, and that was Renfield, which was a action comedy horror film, genre-bending movie, directed and produced by, Chris McKay, who, previously did a movie I really loved from a couple years ago, the Lego Batman movie. And this is inspired by somewhat an adaptation of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, Dracula, though a more comedic spin in which Nicolas Cage plays the titular vampire lord Dracula, and Nicholas Hoult plays his familiar, his assistant, Renfield. Now, you probably get a little bit of a sense of that relationship from the original 1930 Dracula and 1931 Dracula with Bela Lugosi. It's kind of similar to that. But it's like, why don't we just do a comedic spin on it and we focus on their relationship, this toxic relationship, which, by itself on paper is a pretty good idea. And I honestly thought that's what the movie was going to be about. It was just going to be about these two people who've been with each other for a very, very, very long time. And the Renfield, Nicholas Holt's character, realizing like, I don't want to be a part of this relationship anymore. He's a terrible human being. I want to be my own person, my own man. I wanted to, discover new things, interact with new people. And honestly, like the first third of this movie, like the first 30 minutes of the film, I actually like quite a bit. The interactions between Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult. I mean, they're both very talented actors in their own right. They're very charismatic in these roles. The problem is the rest of the movie happens. Like, honestly, this should have just been like a 25-minute, 30-minute, like, short. or like, I don't know, like a YouTube video or something, like, or maybe part of like a comedic anthology film of Universal monsters, like in hindsight now, because it felt like the screenwriters of the studio said, yeah, okay, yeah, all right, yeah, it's kind of a critique on a toxic relationship, great, using, recognizable, horror icons. But what if we make it an action movie? Why not? How about this? How about we put in Awkwafina? Everyone loves Awkwafina. Put Awkwafina in there. She's a police detective. Do that. And they got to go after the cartel. They got to go after the cartel. Ben Schwartz, he's part of the cartel. Have him battle Ben Schwartz. Do that. And let's just make it like an action film where everyone's doing kung fu fighting. And, Nicolas Cage, like he'll occasionally come in the last 2/3, but not really. And that's what the movie is, Chad. It's just like a really disappointing action comedy film. It feels something like, I don't know, all the disappointing action comedy films that we've gotten for years and years and years. I mean, everything from Tim Story's Taxi to that Dave Bautista, Kumail Nanjiani's Stuber movie from a few years ago. It's just so generic and blasé, and it's like the movie just got taken over by a completely different plot. And it's too bad, because I think the initial premise, I think the first 30 minutes was actually quite good, and they just didn't know what to do for the next hour. And that sadly was most of the movie that we got. And so even though I was looking forward to Renfield, I always love reinterpretations of classic Universal monsters and monsters from fiction. You can do so much with that type of mythology and play around with it. I actually encourage it. I love genre bending stuff, but man, just to turn it into your run-of-the-mill generic action comedy where no one has any chemistry and it's just bad joke after bad joke, I was left very disappointed by Renfield. I think it was just the victim of interference, studio interference, executive interference, and I guess they just didn't have confidence in the original idea, which actually could have been fun. I would have preferred if it was actually a little smaller, but they decided we got to make it big. And that was a huge mistake. So Renfield, definitely one of my worst movies of 2023. Honorable mentions, of course. Moving on to the next one, chat. We have The Marvels. Now, listen, I was not the biggest fan of Captain Marvel from a few years ago. It's like, yes, it made $1 billion. It was widely successful. There's no doubt about commercially, that is, because of where it was situated, especially in between like Infinity War, which is one of the highest grossing superhero films of all time, and Endgame, one of the other most highest grossing superhero films of all time. That's when the superhero genre is at its height, the height of its popularity. People were just so excited for superhero content, whether it was Marvel or even DC or anything else in between. And I think that's what, and because Infinity War ended with like, oh, Captain Marvel's going to be important, you got to go watch the movie. I feel like that's what encouraged a lot of people to go see that film. That's why I went to go see that movie. And I, outside of a few things that I thought were really cool, I actually liked how they handled the Skrulls in that first movie. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Overall, I didn't like it. I know Brie Larson, she gets a lot of hate. I think she is a talented actress. Guys, I encourage you to check out the film Room, not The Room. I mean, definitely see the movie The Room. See both. See The Room and then see Room. But she gets a lot of hate. I do feel like she's miscast this character. I just feel like she just hasn't worked. I don't think the material's been there for her. I feel like the character's kind of too stoic. And I never got a sense of chemistry between her and the other leads of the MCU. It'll be fair, doesn't exactly have a lot of screen time with them. And so, leading into the Marvels, which we heard about for months of reshoots and problems. You have a director who I feel like isn't the best, Nia DaCosta, who I'm familiar with her work on the Candyman, I guess requel from 2021, I believe. Which was produced by Jordan Peele, co-written by Jordan Peele. You guys know I'm a huge Candyman fan, and I was profoundly disappointed by that movie for a variety of reasons, and so I'm just like, all right, I don't know. However, it did have Iman Vellani, who starred as Miss Marvel in the Miss Marvel Disney Plus series, and I really liked her quite a bit, really liked her and her family. I thought, so that was one aspect going into it I was actually looking forward to and excited about. I thought maybe she'd bring the personality that was lacking on the part of Brie Larson's Captain Marvel. And although Iman Vellani, I think, is great, I think a lot of people across the board would agree, Iman Vellani is fantastic as Miss Marvel in the Marvels. I think she brings a lot to it, just humor and wonder. So much else about this movie just doesn't work. I think Brie Larson is a little bit better, but still is too stoic and still does not feel comfortable in the role of Captain Marvel. Also, the movie steals from Spaceballs. Like the main plot of the movie, where we follow this villain named, I don't know what her name is. I just call her Deborah. She's Space Deborah. Space Deborah was mad at Captain Marvel because the last movie, because Captain Marvel, she messed up the planet, the Kree planet, and it caused all the water to dry up, the sun to die, and all the air to go. And Space Deborah was like, I want my air. And so she apparently watched Spaceball and goes, that was a good idea. Mel Brooks is right. I'm going to go ahead and start sucking all the air and sucking all the water and sucking all the sun from these other planets and bring it back to my planet. And Captain Marvel went, no, don't do that. But it's like, but it's your fault, Captain Marvel. And like the whole gimmick of the movie, which is every time they use their powers, which is, and it also has like Monica Rambeau in the movie, played by Teyonah Parris, who I like, but I don't feel like she needs to be there. She just gets exposition. That's all she gets in the movie. The whole gimmick of them, every time they use their powers, they switch places and wherever they are. It could be across the universe, across the galaxy, which is like, oh, that's kind of like, that could be a fun gimmick. But sometimes they don't do that. And so they don't really stick to their rule set with the whole powers swapping thing, powers teleporting. And I was like, yeah, this isn't really working. And you could just tell behind the scenes that there is scenes missing from this. It feels oddly edited at times. I do appreciate it's so short, but that's probably because they had a lot of additional footage in there that just wasn't working. And I don't think it's the worst of the MCU. There are still several films that I think are worse, but it's not a good one. It's not a good one. It's very disappointing. And I think this is probably the last time we're going to be seeing Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. I don't know if they're going to eventually bring her back. If they do, it'll be in a very small capacity. But yeah, I did not care for the Marvels at all. Moving on with Marvels, we have the latest chapter in the Conjuring verse, chat, The Nun 2, or The Nun Chapter 2, as it's sometimes referred to as. I think the Conjuring verse is very hit and miss. There are some films within the franchise I like quite a bit. The original Conjuring movie I think is quite good. I love David F. Sandberg's film, the second Annabelle. It was the prequel sequel. I think it was called Annabelle Creation. That's probably my favorite. But then there's a lot of films in the franchise which I just don't think are all that great. I think they rely typically on a lot of the same. And to be fair, I'm not the biggest ghost horror guy. There's certainly exceptions, especially this year. Love the film Talk to Me. But this movie is just doing the same things that we so often see in so many Conjuring verse movies and ghost movies, and it doesn't help that it's a sequel to probably, I think you can make an argument, the worst of the Conjuring verse films. I've seen almost all of them. I did not see the La Llorona, whatever the hell it's called. Did not see that. Everyone says that's the worst one, but I think The Nun is up there, Chad. It is not the worst. It's probably the second worst, and it's a sequel to this. And I'm just like, maybe it's better. Maybe, I don't know. It's been a hot minute since I've seen the original Nun film, but it's just doing the same thing that all these movies do. It's just jump scares after jump scares. It's unlikable characters. We got bullies in this one, and I'm just kind of done with this franchise. I will say this to be positive. Vera Farmiga's sister, Taissa Farmiga, she plays the main lead in this movie, and I actually think she's quite good. She deserves a better film, and she was from the original movie too. I actually quite like her, but again, they just don't write enough good stuff around her for me to be really interested in what's happening in the film. It's just more of the same from the Conjuring verse, and honestly, I'm just kind of done with this franchise. It was a huge commercial success. Like, they clearly love this. They love this series and all the ghost stuff that they keep doing, but I'm just like, it just feels like we're spinning our wheels here. Like, are we leading to anything, or is this going to be another situation where the nun shows up at a new location? So I'm pretty much done with all these Conjuring verse movies at this point, and the Nun certainly helped that along with making me feel done. Moving on from the Nun 2, in terms of honorable mentions, Strays, which was a comedy film directed by Josh Greenbaum. And it follows an abandoned dog, voiced by Will Ferrell, who ends up teaming up with several other dogs, voiced by Jimmy Fox and Randall Park and Isla Fisher, who want to get revenge on Will Ferrell's abusive owner, played by Will Forte. I think this was a kind of like forgotten comedy early this year. I think most people went, oh, yeah, that movie. And really listen, a comedy is the most subjective of genres out there. What I find funny, you may not find funny, and vice versa. But I really did not find this movie funny at all. Although, funny enough, I do actually enjoy a number of kind of talking animal movies. It's an interesting little subgenre, films like, Homeward Bound, which I actually grew up on, which are, I think, quite wholesome. This movie is like, okay, well, in order to be funny, we have to be just the most raunching, disgusting comedy out there, where everything is about dicks and piss and poop. Oh my God. So much of the humor just revolves around pooping. Dogs pooping, humans pooping, other animals pooping, people eating poop, dogs eating poop. Different animals eating each other's poop. I'm just like, I'm kind of done. Like, maybe the director and the screenwriter have a scat fetish. I don't know. I don't want to, kink shame anybody. But I'm just like, can we do something else than just indulge in just poop humor? And the movie's like, no. We're going to be pooping the entire time. And that's what this movie was. I thought it was poop, Chad. I thought it was shit. It was very, I had no expectations going in. I already really disliked the trailers. I'm just like, I think I know exactly what this is going to be. And it was exactly what I thought it was going to be, which is just a really raunchy comedy that where its humor is limited to shit jokes. So did not care for that. It was also a huge bomb too. Big critical failure and a commercial failure this year. Moving on to the next bad honorable mention, and this one might be controversial. Transformers: Rise of the Beast. Now, I did not grow up a Transformers fan. I was a 90s kid, and so I was watching cartoons like Batman the Animated Series and Hey Arnold and Dexter's Laboratory during, the Renaissance era of both theatrical animation and television animation. And so I didn't really watch a lot of those 80s TV shows. Aware of them, but I didn't really watch them, right? Like, He-Man and G.I. Joe and Transformers. However, in years since, I have consumed a lot of Transformers content. Some episodes, original cartoon show like G1, which I'm like, oh, I actually like this. I see what people are see. I actually really enjoy the original, I believe 1986 Transformers movie. I got the touch. I got the power. It's like that's very good. I love that. That was great. Yeah, Orson Welles is Unicron. Hilarious. Doesn't know what the hell he's saying half the time. Very funny. It's dark. They killed the shit out of Starscream. Megatron died, Chad. They killed Frank Welker. And then they got Leonard Nimoy in his place. I was like, wow, they killed Optimus. I was like, this movie has stakes. And it has meaningful deaths, and I really like that movie. But before then, I'd watched like the Michael Bay adaptations, and I think the first movie's fine. It's okay. And then after that, like, oh, horrible. Revenge of the Fallen, everything afterwards, no thank you. However, and then for years I'm just like, I don't really get what people keep saying about this franchise. They're saying like Michael Bay missed the heart. It's like, where's the heart? And then I saw Bumblebee before I even saw the G1 cartoons and the original Transformers movie. And when I saw Bumblebee, I went, by Travis Knight, by the way, who I think is a really, really underrated director. I want to see him do more things. I really like him. He also directed Kubo and the Two Strings, which is a great animated film from like the 2010s. Really good, wonderful stop motion animated movie that he did with Leica. But I saw Bumblebee. I was like, oh, there it is. It's like, yeah, it's borrowing from like E.T., Spielbergian, sure, but it felt so earnest. It felt like it really, for the first time, like understood that property. And I think adapted it very well to live action. I was like, oh, that's great. I think that movie commercially might have suffered because of just all the bad Michael Bay movies, and it burned on as you're paying for the sins of the past, sadly. And I think is what caused the studio to go, let's bring back more of those Michael Bayisms. And it's not quite Michael Bay all the way through, but it's there. It's there. Certainly his interpretations, his reinterpretations of these Transformers. And I found that just to be really disappointing. One, I feel like you just kind of have these really boring human characters that I didn't really care for at all. And I I really disliked how they portrayed some of the Transformers. Like, why do they keep making Optimus Prime like a psychopath in so many of these live action films? Like, I'm going to cut your head. I'm going to kill you and cut your head off. It's like, Jesus Christ. Why are we doing this? It was just, I don't know. I think it's way too long. I hated the soundtrack and score. You know, I really like the music from Bumblebee, but also the original music from the 1980s film. I'm actually kind of surprised that they don't use more of that music now in the live action movies. I feel like that would actually engender a lot of goodwill from Transformers fans. I think audiences like that kind of music anyway. And so I really didn't like the soundtrack of the score. I felt like it was very, very distracting, a little obnoxious in those scenes. Not that I hate 90s hip hop or, 90s rap. I don't. I just feel like which it was used in the movie. It just took me out of the scene. I was just like, it's not working for me. And then generic villains. I don't even remember the villain. It was just like, it was not Megatron. And they had Unicron in it, who was barely in it. He was just this big giant, just like, feed me, God damn it, feed me. And that was it. This is also, I think, the lowest performing Transformers movie, as far as I know. So I don't even know if they're going to, I don't know if they're going to continue on with the franchise. I know that they're doing more Transformers, like animated ones, which actually might be for the best theatrically, so that's kind of cool. But in terms of live action, I think the series might be either put on ice for a while, and I don't think this one did not help. I was very disappointed that they did not continue on with, I don't know, like Travis Knight directing another film, another entry, either doing a Bumblebee 2 or, I don't know, doing like a proper adaptation of G1. And so I really just didn't like this movie. I found it very, very dull as well. Meandering. And just the end. I'm gonna spoil the ending of the movie. The end credits stinger, I did not make me excited at all. It was so weird because I saw it in the audience and went, yeah. I was like, why are you excited? So they set up the character. I forget the actor's name, but the main lead in the movie. He ends up being interrogated by government officials, and he's recruited into the G.I. Joe program. So G.I. Joe exists in the world of Transformers. All these Hasbro properties exist, which I think is fine. But I'm just like, why would I be excited? Because the last two G.I. Joe movies fucking sucked. And what was the last one before that? It was Snake Eyes, which was horrible. So it's like, why would I be excited at all for any of that? You never made a good G.I. Joe movie. And so why would I want any of these properties to cross over? That sounds like a miserable fucking experience. So I'm just like, yeah. And I'm going to tell you right now, that ain't happening. If they do that, I'm not saying they shouldn't do that, but it should be in a completely different, scrap all this, get rid of all this, and start from scratch. You got to start from scratch now. You can't keep doing this. This. We're going back to the Michael Bay-isms. Everything just feels generic as hell. Like, get someone in there, get like a Travis Knight or someone in there who understands his property, recognizes the heart, and brings that out. Both in Transformers and G.I. Joe or Power Rangers, because that's owned by Hasbro now. Like, I wouldn't mind any of these things interacting with each other and crossover. That's fine. But do it right first. Provide me with a reason to be excited for a crossover. And they have not done that, in my opinion. Moving over to Transformers. Disney has made a few stinkers this year, a number of stinkers this year, catastrophic losses on their part. And I think one of their big losses this year was The Little Mermaid, Chad, another remake that I was not excited for and that we didn't need. While I will say that I think Halle Bailey did a very good job singing as Ariel. I mean, she's no Jodie Benson. And I was actually honestly surprised by how much I enjoyed Melissa McCarthy in the role of Ursula, and I love Ursula. I'm a big fan of the original Little Mermaid movies. One of my favorite of the Renaissance era of Disney. It's the movie that's credited with saving Disney animation back in the late 80s and going into the early 90s. But it's just another example of another remake that just feels so unnecessary. My thing with remakes, if you're going to remake a movie, then it needs to be either as good, if not better, than the original film. And they've done that. They did that with The Jungle Book. But ever since then, I don't think they've ever, at least the ones I've seen, they've never been able to reach that same height as The Jungle Book from the 20-teens. And I think it's very much the case. It's a film that felt the need to add an extra hour to the running time. And I still don't know what they added. It's just like what improved from the original movie by adding that extra hour, which the original movie is like barely an hour and 20 minutes long. It's like an hour and 15 minutes. And they had the goal to add an extra hour on top, where so little actually happens in the film. You have some really terrible song additions. I mean, you have all the music from the original, yes, of course, and some of it is done well, and some of it's not, and some of it's just downright awful. Awkwafina, again, I don't mean to keep hating on her, but she plays a variation on the character of Scuttle. She's not a seagull; she's something else in this movie, and she has this rap song. And it does not fit whatsoever. It is just like, as soon as I heard, I was like, oh my God, it's so obnoxious. And then you just have these covers of like other songs. The Prince gets his song sucks. There's just so much about this movie that is lesser than the original film. And again, I'm just like, we're just gonna keep getting these soulless remakes from Disney until they all start to fail. Like this movie, like I think broke even. Maybe it either just broke even or lost a little bit of money. So maybe if this trend continues, they'll stop making these remakes, or maybe make remakes of films that probably deserve them, or give films a second chance. Just give them like relatively low budgets. And also the look of the movie is ugly as hell. Like it has this it's almost like they rubbed Vaseline on the lens. It's like, okay, you know how the original Little Mermaid is just it's just brimming with color. It's a beautiful color palette, chat. I mean, yes, of course you have your blues and your greens, but you have these rich reds and yellows and purples and oranges, and the entire color spectrum. Everything is like a dull gray blue. It's like, why is everything a dull? Everything is like a dull gray blue. It's like, okay, I know that's yellow, I know that's red, I know that's green, but then there's like, it's like I'm fucking colorblind. It's like there's just like this shading, this shade of blue and gray on top of it. I'm just like, why are you doing that? And it's like, people are saying, it's like, well, it's in the ocean, it's in the water. I don't fucking care. It's Little Mermaid. There's a thick, voluptuous octopus lady. Javier Bardem is the king of the seven seas. There's magic. I don't care. Just make it look beautiful. And they decided to not. It's just, it's like it's lifeless. It's life, and some of the characters, my lord. Speaking of lifeless, Flounder looks like he's gonna suck your soul out. Sebastian looks like an abomination. I was just like, yeah, cook them and eat them. That's what I would have done, chat. So, yeah, not a fan of The Little Mermaid. Also, I was not a fan of the movie Eileen, which was a psychological thriller from, I believe, like a first-time director, or at least it's an adaptation of a book. And honestly, the premise of the movie sounded interesting. It's set in like 1960s Massachusetts. Kind of has like a Hitchcockian vibe, chat, set during the winter. It follows these two women and seemingly focuses on their relationship while they work at a juvenile detention center. You have one of the women played by Thomasin McKenzie, the other one played by Anne Hathaway. And though, even though it looked like it had so much personality in terms of its aesthetic, I mean, it looks like a noir movie, from that time period, but it's anything but that. Like it doesn't even really have a story, like at all. It just meanders. It goes nowhere until we finally like, all right, shit, we got to get to a third act here, I guess. And so let's go ahead and focus on something that's completely unrelated to the relationship between these two, in which I guess the big reveal is like, one of them's gay and the other one's bisexual. It's like, you gotta give me more than just that. Like this taboo, forbidden relationship. Oh, they're lesbians. It's like, so maybe in the 1960s, when Alfred Hitchcock and many of his other filmmakers, the filmmakers, that were working alongside him back in the day, yeah, that was taboo. It's 50 years in the future. It's 60 years in the future. That's not taboo anymore. You gotta do something else, and they just don't. And my God, the third act, this movie doesn't even have an ending. It just kind of stops. Like they deal with a situation that literally has nothing to do with their respective relationship, and then one of them just leaves the film, and Thomasin McKenzie continues to just be mousy, but also a little crazy. And I was actually looking forward to this. I was looking forward to like Anne Hathaway come back, because I know she was taking some time off, and she seemed to be like this femme fatale, but she wasn't much of a femme fatale at all. And I found it just incredibly dull and boring and very disappointing. You got to do more than just have them be lesbians, all right? That's not taboo, even though some people still think that is. And then moving on to the next two, I have two more, and these were on my top 10 worst list for quite a while, but they were kicked off. And my second to last honorable mention is Fast X Wakanda Forever, chat. Yes, bro, vroom, vroom, to the moon, for the family. Now listen, I am a big fan of a number of the films in this franchise. You know, it started out as one thing very early on. Remember when they were street racers? Remember when Vin Diesel and the crew were street racers, chat, and they stole DVD players? Like, that's what they used to do. And now they became bank robbers and then super spies and secret agents. And now they're practically superheroes defying the laws of gravity and physics on a whim, just because they have the power of family, right? And we were with it for a while. I was with it for a while. Many people were with it for a while. I think 5, 6, and 7 are actually a really great trilogy, are really, really fun. I like this movie quite a bit. And Seven's my favorite movie of the franchise. I think James Wan did a great job. I think I may not be the biggest fan of him as a horror director. I think as an action director, he's got a lot of chops. And he actually made me feel something in that movie, especially with the tragic passing of Paul Walker, who played the character of Brian in that movie. It's like that, in hindsight now, with hindsight, chat, I think it's safe to say they should have ended the franchise there. Should have ended on a high note. Because after that, they just kept making these movies with 8 and 9 and these spinoffs, and like they never managed to reach certainly the height of 7, or even really 5 or 6. And they just got lazy. They got more indulgent. They have such a huge cast of characters. Some characters that literally died on screen. We saw them die, and now they came back, and they're asking, like, how'd you come back? And they're like, I don't know. They don't know. They don't even show you. They don't even explain it. It's like, he's back, she's back now. It doesn't matter if you were blown up in a car or if you were sucked out of an airplane going 250 miles per hour. You're going to come back. It's okay. The family defies death. With the power of family, you can do anything. And that's what they think they can get away with in this movie, this self-indulgent, bloated film, where really the only thing that it has going for it is Jason Momoa as the villain, chat, who is the son of the villain in Fast 5, who was apparently there the whole time. We just never saw him. Every time he was behind the safe, he was actually in the car next to his dad. We just didn't see him there, which is so funny when they pull all the retcons in Fast and Furious are both hilarious and so frustrating. And this is very much the case of this movie. And listen, we've been on this ride. We've driven with Vin Diesel a quarter mile of a time, chat, with throughout his entire life. But I think it's time to stop. I think it's time to get out of the car. If he's not going to stop, we got to throw ourselves in that car, chat, because it's not going anywhere. There is no destination. Like, nothing really matters anymore. None of the characters. So many of the characters just feel like they're there out of obligation, and they have nothing for them to do. Like, they give stuff for like Vin Diesel to do, or Michelle Rodriguez. They give her some things to do, but like so much of the rest of the cast, they don't do anything. Like, one of the big things that people were excited about was like, oh, Han and was it Deckard Shaw? I forget which Shaw, bro. Deckard Shaw, played by Jason Statham. Like, oh shit, well, Deckard Shaw killed Han, but not really. But now they got to interact with each other. That's gonna be fun. That's gonna be cool, interesting dynamic. It's not. They don't do anything with it. Ludacris and Tyrese Gibson, who actually have been fun in the franchise, they just feel tired in the movie at this point. They're bringing in so many other new faces. I'm like, wait, who are you? What are you doing? What's the point? John Cena, who is the villain of the last film. He's a member. He's back with the family again, and he's cracking jokes and being goofy. It's just like, you didn't earn any of this. What are you talking about? And it has the gall to end on a ridiculous cliffhanger for the next film, which is now originally they said it was going to be a trilogy finale. That's going to be a trilogy of films. But since this movie is just so underperformed, because it cost so much money. I think it cost around $350 million, if not more than that. And I think it didn't even break. I don't think it even broke even. It either didn't break even or it actually lost money. And so now they're probably going to like, oh shit, how are we going to finish this movie? This, I mean, they're going to make another one, but I'm very interested to see what they're going to do and if they're going to change like anything. I mean, because they've become so bloated and self-indulgent, I imagine they just won't at this point. But it's going to be very interesting. But I'm done. I'm done with this franchise. I really don't care anymore. I appreciate the films that they made in the past. I think 5, 6, and 7 are legitimately like great, fun, over-the-top action movies. I think there's you can have a lot of fun with like some of the lesser entries in the franchise, like Tokyo Drift and Too Fast, Too Furious, and hell, even the original. It's a Point Break ripoff, but there's some fun there, some good stuff in that movie. But at this point, I'm over it. I just kind of want to be done with this franchise, and I think a lot of other people are as well. They're getting out of the car, chat, whether Vin Diesel is stopping or not. We gotta throw ourselves out of the car. And then my last honorable mention, which was on my top 10 for a good while, Chad, a good while, and that is The Exorcist Believer, Chad. The Exorcist : and heavy emphasis on that : Chad. Believer, which is the latest sequel, requel in the Exorcist franchise, directed by David Gordon Green, who's primarily a comedy filmmaker, but then he dipped his toes into horror with, I still say, one of the best slasher films of the 2010s, which is Halloween 2018. I love that movie. I think it's one of the best entries in Halloween franchise. I think Halloween Kills is the mess. I like Halloween Ends, but I understand why people dislike it. But he's like, okay, he's going to get Exorcist. Let's see what he can do. And apparently it's just more of the same. It's just more the same stuff that we've constantly seen throughout the lesser entries in this franchise. I actually recently rewatched The Exorcist this past year. And because I for the long time, I think I saw that film when I was too old, and maybe I didn't have the right mindset when I originally watched, and I thought, like, yeah, I respect The Exorcist, but it's not really my thing. And I rewatched it, and I found a renewed appreciation for the movie and the storytelling and the performances and the atmosphere that was created, and I was like, wow, this I get it now. I get it now. This film, it's just like all the other ones, at least the ones that I have seen. 3 is the one I still haven't seen yet. Everyone says that's actually one of the good sequels, but that's neither here nor there. This movie is just another lazy entry in this franchise. Like, really the only original thing that they do is that they have just 2 possessed girls instead of 1. But it's just doing the same exact things that the original film did, except just worse. It's terrible in terms of how it's shot. It's edited weird. There's unnecessary jump scares. There's unnecessary cameos in the movie. They bring back Ellen Burstyn, who played the mother of Reagan in the original film, did such a great job, despite what the marketing tells you that, oh, she's going to be a major role. You pretty much saw all her scenes in the movie, and they give her some of the worst goddamn dialogue that they, in a weird way, is trying to critique the original film's final act, which to me is just utterly bizarre and kind of insulting, to be perfectly honest. There's an interesting concept in the movie where it's like, we're going to have other religions perform exorcisms along with, the Catholic exorcism, but that becomes something just really fucking goofy, kind of becomes its own, evil dies tonight mantra, which I don't know why David Gordon Green insists on doing that over and over and over again. It's not working, man. People are making a joke out of it. You got to stop. And yeah, it is. I mean, and there's also just characters that, even though there's like 2 possessed girls, it's very obvious that he only cares about one of the possessed girls. They don't give a fuck about that other one. Other one gets her soul sucked into hell. She doesn't matter at all. That poor little white girl, Chad, she gets her soul sucked right out of her. She's screwed. Other one makes it though. But yeah, this is, and what's so funny is, I guess Universal and Blumhouse, which they bought the property from Warner Brothers for like $400 million. Like, oh, we're going to turn this into a thing. Movie didn't do that well. And I don't know how they're going to recoup their money. If they were planning on doing a trilogy, which I think at this point they will not end up doing, and maybe they'll just find a new way to use the Exorcist license. But it was just listen, the original Exorcist is a great movie. It's perfect. It does so many things right. It never necessitated sequels, or it's just, it has a perfect ending, right? It's a very sad, it's like they did something great, they accomplished something in the end, but it was not without profound loss, and it's like, wow, it's a great button. And they just insist on trying to tell more stories in this universe that I just don't really care to see. And this is just one of those other attempts, one of those other sequels where they think that, we can do better, and they just don't. They just don't. And at the same time, manage to sneak in some subtle jabs of the original film, which is not very classy in my opinion. So those are my honorable mentions, chat. My honorable mentions for the worst movies of 2023, but they are not the worst movies of 2023. I have my top 10 worst movies of 2023, and we're going to start with number 10, chat. And it's Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Now, for those of you who don't know, I am a huge Indiana Jones fan. I mean, I have my poster of Raiders of the Lost Ark right behind me. You can see that right there. I've talked about the original trilogy so many times throughout my content creation career. I grew up watching these movies, chat. I fell in love with Raiders of the Lost Ark and Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade. I think it's a great trilogy. You know, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, they brought back the classic action adventure movie in the 1980s. Like Indiana Jones, the series has been such an influential film series for decades at this point. And like so many other people, you know, we were all excited for. I was very excited for, like, you know, the return of Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And I saw the movie. I felt like very vindicated because I feel like I was one of the few people back in the day was saying this movie sucks. This movie's like really. I remember watching this in the theater and going like, this is really bad. And then you had so many other people saying like, no, it's good. And you know, the reasons as to why the movie was terrible, I just think Steven Spielberg was just not the filmmaker he once was. I think he, much like George Lucas and Ridley Scott and other people, he has forgotten the aesthetics of those movies, which indulged in practical effects and matte paintings and blue screens and shot in location. And one is just has great action sequences and wonderful characters and dynamics and dialogue, and that movie just didn't have it at all. So that was disappointing. It sucks like hell that the last Indiana Jones movie is terrible. But then, you know, Disney acquired Lucasfilm, and you know, they've done Star Wars, and they're like, hey, let's do Indiana Jones as well, and Dial of Destiny. I'm just like, I was very concerned. I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure you should be doing that, especially when Spielberg was originally supposed to direct, but then he dropped down. Then James Mangold came out. I was like, okay, James Mangold, all right, he's directed some great movies. I mean, from Logan and Ford versus Ferrari and Copland. It's like, okay, he could do it. Let's see. And I don't know to what degree I can blame James Mangold for this movie, but he's got to share some of the blame, Chad, because this movie is abysmal. It's in a weird way, they almost try to like extend an olive branch to people who so thoroughly despise Crystal Skull by having that initial 15-20 minute intro with like classic Indiana Jones fighting Nazis in the 1940s, and I would have preferred they not done that just because it's just so bizarre watching that scene, because I see what you're doing, but you're still not adhering to the aesthetics that have so defined that franchise for so long, and I'm so immersed in the look of those movies and how they work that when you just move away from it, it just stands out to me, where so much of that opening and then of course the rest of the movie is just overstuffed and filled with CGI. You have weird young smooth face CGI Indiana Jones mocap by Harrison Ford and probably however many other stunt doubles that just looks odd. You look at him and go like, sometimes it looks good, and sometimes it's like you look like a PS2 character. Like there's something off about you. Like there's no life inside your eyes. It's very bizarre. And that leads to the rest of the movie, which I think it was a huge mistake to just keep. The thing that really bothers me about this movie is that the movie kept just shoving it in our faces that Indiana Jones is old, is fat, he's a loser, and there's much better people around him who do the job much better. And all that, I think, was kind of realized in the character of Shaw, played by the Fleabag actress Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who initially, which I know before the movie was coming out, was getting a lot of hate, But I remember watching the movie. I'm like, when she first popped up, and she just seemed to be like really in archaeology, and she seemed to like, I'm excited. And I was like, I'm getting a good vibe from her. And I remember like her initial interaction with Indy was like, I think kind of wholesome. And I was like, no, I'm liking this. And then that quickly changes. And she just becomes this horrible human being. She betrays him, tries to kill him at one point. And then after that, then she just starts saying all these horrible, mean things to him. Just starts saying how I'm so much better than you. And I'm like, this isn't the fucking Fiona Shaw and the Dial of Destiny. This is Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. What are you doing? Why? It's like they almost wanted us to resent this character and not like this relationship at all. You have a knockoff Short Round who has none of the charm of Ke Huy Quan from Temple of Doom, who I'm sorry. I mean, in retrospect, I'm actually glad he didn't come back for it, because I've said for years I would love to have seen them reunite and have a story about them. But if this was going to be the result of it, then I'm glad that didn't happen. And then the rest of the movie, we just go from one bloated, generic, poorly choreographed action scene, overstuffed, overfilled with unnecessary CGI, and then sadly, like a really lackluster. Even I like Mads Mikkelsen as an actor; he's great. I was like, he's cast, he's gonna be a villain, he's gonna be a Nazi, perfect. And he's just kind of there. Like, there's no real menace to him at all. He's even like, hey man, they softened him as a Nazi. He's just like, listen, the Nazis, we did some bad things, but I'm just gonna go back in time. I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna kill Hitler. So I'm a good Nazi. I'm just like, okay. I'm like, sure. I'm like, I never was timid by him at all, or any of his weird henchmen. Boy, I love Boyd Holbrook as I live and breathe the Wolverine. They don't give him anything to do. And then it just leads into this bombastic, unnecessary third act where it's time travel and it's Nazis and it's this giant ancient battle in Greece. And I'm like, what was so charming about the original Indiana Jones movies is, yes, it had these really cool action sequences and using magic and mysticism and religion and the occult and stuff. But when you kind of think about it, like, a lot of the third acts are kind of intimate, especially the last movie, Last Crusade. Like, the third act is literally just Indiana Jones kind of going through all these traps, trying to figure out how to get to the Holy Grail, confronting this. He just ends up having a conversation. Like, that's the third act of the movie. But we're so invested in it because they sold us. They sold us as Indy went across all these different traps, trying to, follow his father's book, Henry Jones, Sr., right? Until he finally got to that night. And then you had the guy who played General Veers and Grandmaster Pycelle. He turned into like a zombie man. That was awesome. And then he comes out of there and he saves his dad, and then the Nazi lady falls because evil Ursula, she sucked. Let her go, and he let her go, and they ride out in the sunset. I was like, that is a great ending. But this, I'm just like, Indy's like, just let me die. Like, that's the ending. He's just like, leave me here. As you've been saying throughout this entire movie, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I'm fat, I'm old, I'm sad. I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm like, oh my God. It does end on like at least a wholesome moment between him and Marion, which was cute. But man, so much. Like, is Crystal Skull worse? Maybe. Is Dial of Destiny worse? Maybe. I don't know. Like, if anyone wanted to say, like, I think Dial of Destiny is the worst, is worse than Crystal Skull, I wouldn't argue with you. I'd be like, sure. Or if someone said that Crystal Skull is worse than Dial of Destiny, I'd be like, yeah, man. But those two movies, they're not nearly as great as the trilogy. And even as flawed as Temple of Doom is with its dated stuff and some of its racism, that movie is still amazing. It does, and Dial of Destiny and Crystal Skull do not even nowhere. It doesn't come close to reaching the height of quality of Raiders of the Lost Ark and Last Crusade. They should have just ended it. They should have just ended it in 1989, The Last Crusade, where they were onto the sunset. I mean, hindsight's 2020, of course, but man, what a disappointing movie. Moving on. from Indiana Jones, my 10th worst movie of 2023. We move on to my 9th worst movie of 2023, and that is Meg 2, The Trench. Now, that poster looks really cool, right? It looks like a really cool poster, chat. You got a fucking T-Rex eating like some kind of dinosaur, and then you got the Megalodon that's about to eat the T-Rex. Like, that's kind of awesome. That's not the movie. That's not the movie at all. It's like, yes, this is a sequel to the original Meg, which was also really blasé and generic and didn't really have any teeth to it at all. Good old, the PG-13 Meg. They come here, continuing this franchise on, led by Jason Statham and these group of personality-less scientists who are studying the mysterious trench, which possibly contains prehistoric life, including more megalodons as well. But the thing about the movie is it's not really about the megalodons. It's not really about this prehistoric fisher. It's not really about this prehistoric world that exists under the sea, filled of all sorts of abominations like krakens and everything else that would just eat you, just monsters, right? It's kind of like a knockoff Die Hard. So much of the movie just has Jason Statham and these other supporting characters whose names you don't really know, just doing these really generic, just action things. And and about illegal mining. It's about illegal mining and wanting to exploit the environment for its resources. Really, you don't get to any truly big megalodon, kraken, giant underwater monster stuff until the third act. But by the time you do get there, you're like, you don't care because you're just so bored and probably pissed off because you spent all your time watching this generic eco-terrorist Die Hard ripoff that is trying to shoehorn in this environmental message about undersea mining. It's just like, why? I want to see giant monsters. Like, you guys know I'm a big creature feature fan. We've watched a lot of creature features here on my platforms, watch parties, reviews. And so I don't mind, I'm like, hey, as long as you have some characters with some personality in there that are fun, some good back and forth, some witty dialogue, and they got to fight some monsters under the ocean, let's go. I'm game. And they just don't do that. They just don't. He's like, yes, Jason Statham says it's a megalodon. And it's cool when he says it, but I need more than just that. I need more than just 15 minutes at the end of the movie where you're finally selling me on the Meg 2, The Trench. I don't need another. And this movie's long. It's like 2 hours. I don't need an hour 45 minutes being lectured about the risks and the dangers of undersea mining and how it's going to destroy the environment. It's like, I want to see monsters. That's what I want to see. And they just, for whatever reason, they didn't want to deliver with that. And I was very, very disappointed and bored watching the Meg 2. Moving on from the Meg, my eighth worst movie, the 8th worst movie of 2023 for me was Disney's Wish. Disney had a really bad year, chat. There's no denying that. Probably their worst year since the 1980s when the company almost went under. When their animated projects were failing, chat. And speaking of failing animated project, Wish, which was supposed to be the celebration of Disney's 100 years of existence, 100 years of their animated catalog. And the best that they could deliver was Wish, which it focuses on this 17-year-old girl named Asha, who is a member of the Kingdom of Roses or whatever it's called, who the kingdom is ruled by this king and queen, specifically the king, voiced by Chris Pine, who is King Magnifico. And every month he grants a wish of a single person, but it can't be a cool wish, can't be a big wish, got to be a small wish. But then for whatever reason, once he grants it, you forgot that was actually what you really wanted because reasons. This is just Disney being lazy. Not only does it just look bad, has this very washed out look. Not only does it have some of the worst Disney songs, I think, in quite some time. I mean, listen, even though we might not like certain entries in, a variety of Disney animated franchises, their musical numbers tend to stand out. And this is not the case. So there's not a single good song in this movie. I mean, so much so that people were mocking were mocking the film before he released, because they released, the music of the movie before, and people were going, oh my God, this is terrible. And it really is. It feels like the music and the script was like written by like an AI. It's like, ChatGPT, write me a song about trying to find yourself. And that's what the that's what the song came up with. ChatGPT, write me a song about an evil wizard king. And they gave us Chris Pine's song. It's just like nothing about this had any heart or imagination or originality. Like, of course, it's celebrating the 100 years of Disney, and so it is just, in between all the generic bullshit in the film, they just fill it to the brim with obnoxious references. Some in the background, but some just in your face, like, ha, ha, ha. Like, Asha has these 7 shitty friends, these 7 horrible friends who are just the 7 dwarves. You got a sleepy one, you got a sneezy one, you got an angry one. They got a black one. They got a black one. She doesn't do anything. She just stands there and she's black. But that's all they do with her. And yeah, this was just like, again, Disney Animation and Pixar, they are hit and miss. They are not delivering like they used to, and they've been resting, I think, on their laurels for a very long time, and they've delivered, I think, a lot of critical and commercial failures over these last several years. And I think in all of it's kind of amassed itself with Wish. Like, Wish, to me, even though it's supposed to be the celebration of their entire history, it represents everything that I think is wrong with Disney, but also with Disney Animation as a whole. And these movies take a long time to make, and I'm sure they're like, oh shit, we gotta make a lot of changes. But you have some of these films that are in deep in production probably at this point, and so I wonder if we're gonna get a few more Wishes in the next few years. I hope not, but I don't know. Don't have your hopes high, chat, especially after a film like Wish. Horrible movie, one of the worst of 2023. But chat, Wish is not as bad. It's not as bad as my number 7, my 7th worst movie of 2023, which is Ridley Scott's Napoleon. Now listen, Ridley Scott has made some amazing films throughout his entire career. He's probably made arguably my favorite movie of all time. Certainly in my top 5, top 3, I love Alien. Alien 1979 is a fantastic horror science fiction film, right? It's a movie to me that just, it's one of those films that made me fall in love with him. It was my first rated R movie I ever watched as a kid. It terrified me, but I was enraptured. I was obsessed with that world that was created. But Ridley Scott to me is the definition of a hit and miss director. For every good movie he makes 5 or 6 bad ones. And I think that's very much been the case for the last 20 or so years. And although, I think The Martian was quite good, and I liked this other historical epic that he made a few years ago. The name escapes me at the top of my head, chat, with Ben Affleck and Adam Driver. But in any case, The Last Duel, thank you so much. I think he's made, again, The Martian and The Last Duel are quite good. But in between all those movies, chat, he's made a lot of flops. Like for every The Martian, he makes a Prometheus and Alien Covenant. For every The Last Duel, he makes The Counselor or The House of Gucci. And it's very much the same for Napoleon, chat, which is, there's been an attempt to do a grand biopic of Napoleon for decades. Stanley Kubrick tried and couldn't do it. There's been adaptations of and historical epics of maybe specific moments in Napoleon's life or battles in Napoleon's life. But Ridley Scott's like, no. I'm gonna cover everything. I'm gonna cover his entire life. And I'm like, don't do that, because that's always a risk, because when you say I'm gonna cover his entire life, when you're gonna cover everything, then you're probably gonna have to truncate stuff. It's gonna be weird. You're gonna have to edit out stuff, and that's exactly what happened. This to me just feels like a Spark Notes version, a Cliff Notes version of Napoleon Bonaparte's life. One of the biggest historical figures in perhaps the biggest historical figure in France's entire history. Yes, he was a soldier, a diplomat, a tyrant, a monster, a hero, a villain. Like, there's a lot you can cover with a person like that. But for whatever reason, Ridley Scott said, I want to cover kind of the weird relationship he had with the Empress Josephine, which again, the Napoleon is played by Joaquin Phoenix, and Vanessa Kirby plays Empress Josephine in that movie. And so much of the movie kind of revolves around the relationship, which, to be honest, isn't very interesting anyway. And then in between all those scenes, we're just going to get these Cliff Notes versions of some of his battles, which are apparently very historically inaccurate. And these other moments that, again, we'll have a scene in this movie where he'll be negotiating with someone and like, hey, this is my friend. And then like a scene and a half later, which will just fade to white or fade to black. It's either fade to white or fade to black in this movie. We'll then go, it's like many years later maybe. It's like, I'm at war with this friend of mine. I was like, what the fuck happened? It's a movie that feels like because there is 2 hours of footage missing. But at the same time, still feels overly long and overstuffed because you're insisting on doing this grand biopic of trying to cover everything, every aspect of his life. And so, an attempt to do everything, you made a film for no one, in my opinion. And although I think Vanessa Kirby is doing the best job that she can with the material she's given, I actually like her in the film. And there's a number of other secondary and tertiary actors that I think are doing a good job. Again, they don't have enough screen time to really develop them. But Joaquin Phoenix is woefully miscast. He gives one of the worst performances of the year, in my opinion. He's ridiculous in this movie. I mean, already I'm kind of bothered by, so the prototypical foreign accent is the British accent, huh? Is that what we're just going with, even though they're French? Should they have a French accent? Can't we just do that? But it's like, okay. Especially when he's negotiating with the British, I'm just like, wait, which side is talking? Because everyone sounds the same, except him, because he sounds like he's from, Middle America, or wherever place in America he's from. But he just does he just does weird shit in the movie that doesn't make any sense. Like, so much is about the love story, the spicy, erotic, passionate love story of Napoleon and Josephine. And it's just unintentionally funny. Like, he'll just end up, like, when he's lusting after, he'll just start making fish sounds or something. Like, it's like, what is this? And it was almost like Ridley Scott's like, no, this is brilliant. Let's leave it in. And because he's like, Joaquin Phoenix is like, yeah, I just started doing this. Felt like something Napoleon would do. How would you know that? It's just embarrassing. It's an embarrassing movie. And Ridley's again, but the whole thing is like, oh, well, wait till the director's cut. It's like, no. How about you deliver a good movie? Why? And him and another filmmaker, they have their whole director's cut thing is a crutch. That to me is a total crutch. It's like, oh, well, you got to wait till the director's cut comes out and then that'll be good. It's like, no. Present me with the movie the movie that you have. Present me with the movie that you have, and I will judge it as I see fit. I shouldn't have to wait a year and a half to go like, oh, no, well, you can't judge this movie because it's not his realized vision. It's like, no. And in that case, again, so many movies this year have been so overly long and bloated and indulgent. Maybe instead of making a movie, you should make it a miniseries instead. You know how many episodes that you can have for a show, as multiple seasons covering Napoleon's entire life? A lot. It'll be really interesting. Why insist on making a movie? Where it'd probably be better to do a miniseries. There's no excuse. Because if you're going to make it a movie, well, you're going to have a Ridley Scott Napoleon, and that's exactly what you got. One of the most bloated, overindulgent, most ridiculous historical epics probably made in the last 20 years. So that is why Napoleon is my 7th worst movie of 2023. But, chat, it's not as bad as my 6th movie, the 6th worst movie of 2023, which is The Flash, chat. The DCEU's The Flash. This film has been a saga. I mean, this movie was announced 10 years ago, probably more than that, right when the first season of the Flash CW series came out. The Flash CW series, which went on for, I believe, 9 seasons, finished its entire run before The Flash came out with Ezra Miller. And speaking of Ezra Miller, who's a nut, who is either assaulting people or choke slamming people or grooming people or possibly has a cult on his weird compound with babies shoving bullets in their mouths. It's just like, oh my God, like that whole saga was exhausting. Never mind that, Ezra Miller is just miscast as the character. But also on top of the fact that Warner Brothers has been trying to make a Flash film, not for 20 years. They tried to make a Flash movie in the 2020s with Ryan Reynolds, but they were trying to make a Flash movie in the 1980s after the success of the Christopher Reeve, Richard Donner Superman films. They've been trying to make this movie for 40 years, various iterations of it. And this is the best you can do. This is the best you can do. It's embarrassing. I will say this. The movie has moments that I did like. I like the familial stuff. I like the family stuff with Barry and his parents. I thought that was good. That was the heart of the movie. The few times that it pops in. Michael Keaton coming back as Batman. He's underused. And I would have liked to have learned more about like what happened to him after the events of Batman 89, Batman Returns, but maybe it's not even that Batman anyway, so who even knows? But the action scenes, we get to move him and see him move in such a way that we never saw him move in the original film, because he's moving around like this because he can't turn his fucking head. But now he can move his head all the time. He's doing backflips and shit. It's cool. It's very cool. But there's just so much of this film that just doesn't work. One, it's just a bastardization. Like, it's a huge mistake. Like, as soon as it was announced that we're going to adapt the Flashpoint story, I'm like, why? I'm not saying I never want you to, but that's like the third film in your Flash trilogy. That shouldn't be the first movie, because you got to like establish like this character. You got to establish his rogues gallery, his supporting characters, his love interest, which the movie doesn't really do. And they're like, no, we're gonna just like so much of the DCU where they just rush through everything because they just want that Avengers money. They just want that Marvel money. And they didn't lay down the groundwork. They didn't do the hard work, which is what Marvel originally did back in the day. And they choose to adapt a storyline which would probably take years, if not a decade, to probably lead into. And it's a bastardized version of that story. Thank God we still have the Flashpoint Paradox animated movie. That's a far superior film to that to this film. One, it's barely anything like that original story anyway. It just kind of borrows and steals from it, of course. And it just deals with all the timey-wimey multiverse mumbo jumbo, which people are already sick of at this point. Like, oh, that's just like whatever. But then even like the action, it's like, all right, we're probably going to see some like cool sequences with the Flash and using his powers. Like, no. Like, the opening of this movie is so creepy. Like, the opening action sequence with the Flash and the babies that are falling out of that hospital, chat, and they look so weird. They were dead before they hit the ground. As soon as they went out that window, chat, those babies were dead. And then when the Flash saves them, and we just see just how lifeless and rubbery and CGI they look, it's like, oh my God, what is this? Like, the CGI in this movie is some of the worst theatrical CGI this year. Probably the worst theatrical CGI I've seen since Cats and Gods of Egypt. It's that bad. And then we get to the third act after just a boring action sequence where they bring back just a sad Michael Shannon as Zod, who doesn't even want to be there. We get to a scene where Andy Muschietti is just literally digging up the graves, opening up the coffins, and holding up the dead bodies, the dead lifeless CGI bodies of George Reeves and Christopher Reeve and all these other actors who play these iconic DC characters, just to show them standing there like this, just lifeless, not really looking at you, just kind of like looking like this. Like, maybe they're supposed to be looking at you, but you can't really tell. Looking like the dead-eyed children in Robert Zemeckis' The Polar Express. That's the CGI in this movie. It's Polar Express CGI. It's just like something's not right. They're not alive. I think they're about to steal my soul. Like, you cannot make eye contact with them because they will suck out your soul. It's like Shang Tsung, chat. And then you just, like, the first time, I guess in a while, since we like see a live action interpretation of Supergirl theatrically, and they blow it there. I know a lot of people like Sasha Calle. They don't give her anything to do, like, at all. Everyone was praising her performance, like, oh, everyone's praising her. She must be great. Then she doesn't do anything. She's just kind of, he's like, She's mad, and justifiably so. I understand why she's mad, but that's all they do. She goes from, I'm mad, I hate you, and she leaves, and then she comes back, she's like, I'll help you. That's it. That's all they do with her. And I was like, well, that was a big waste. And that's what this is, chat. Like, I love the Flash. I love the character. And I want to see this character realized well cinematically. And I do not believe they have been at all. Especially with this movie. And that's the thing. Like this, I go back to, it's like what I say about a lot of the DCU films. I've said about the Justice League movie and Batman v Superman, you know, the first time we've seen these characters on screen together for the first time. This was the best you can do. In 10 years, in 20 years, in 40 years, this is the best you can do. No excuse. No excuse whatsoever. And I am very concerned about anime. Listen, I'm excited for James Gunn's DCU. I can't wait for Superman Legacy. I'm looking forward to the other projects that were announced, with the exception of that Batman movie. With the exception of that Batman Brave and the Bold with Andy Muschietti. I was like, no. I like his first It movie. Outside of that, I haven't really cared for any of his work, especially The Flash. I'm like, I mean, if he's just going to do the same thing he did with The Flash, then no fucking thank you. I'm very concerned about that film. But we'll see. We'll see. So I hate The Flash, as you guys can obviously tell. But Chad, I have to admit it. I had to admit to myself after seeing this film, driving home from the theater, I was like, do I hate this movie more than The Flash? And I do. And that is James Wan's Aquaman 2, blue on blue. Aqua Bro, my man. Now listen, I am not a fan of the original Aquaman movie. Like for the longest time, I like Jason Momoa as Aquaman. But the thing that I always disliked is I always thought he was in bad movies, whether it be his cameo appearances in BVS or him showing up in Justice League. I was just like, I like you as this character, but I just don't like the material that's being written for you or the movies that you're appearing in. And that was, I think it was very much the case like for Aquaman, which for me, it felt like James Wan said to himself, okay, I'm directing Aquaman, and I don't know if I'll ever direct another Aquaman movie, so I'm going to put in every single Aquaman story I can think of into this one film. And I'm going to put in Orm, I'm going to put in his mom, I'm going to put in Black Man and his dad, I'm going to put in the trench. I'm just like, what are you doing? It's too much. It's too much. Stop it. Stop it. And that movie just felt so bloated and understuffed and undercooked. And because of that, I thought it was too much. It's like if you just step back and instead focus on one or two of these things, then I thought you could have told a really compelling story with these characters. Everything feels so surface level in the first Aquaman, and leading to this, but you know, it did well. Commercially, it's the most commercially successful DCEU movie. It made more money than a Batman and Superman movie. It made more money than a Justice League film, which is mind-boggling. But again, I think the big reason why is because it came out during the hottest period for superhero films. Like that, I think it was 2018? That was like the same year, I want to say, as Black Panther and Infinity War. And so it was like, well, there you go. I think that was a huge reason as to why the movie did. Some people were just like, these are great. These movies are Aquaman. Let's go see it. I think that's what propelled it to the success that it had. But then with this movie's been its own saga. This film has been fascinating to follow. The Amber Heard of it all. You know, just the whole controversy with her and the Johnny Depp and how she's in the movie because she's Mara and how they're cutting her stuff out of the film, and there's controversies on set and no one likes her, and Jason Momoa's complaining about her and she's complaining about Jason Momoa. It's like, oh, that's exhausting. But then all the behind the scenes, apparently, how this movie was not, reshot once. Now, listen, reshoots are a part of the filmmaking process. Like, studios actually like, okay, we're going to set aside some time for reshoots if we need them. Like, that's part of the process. But this movie had, like, not one, not two, not three, not four. I think either 4 or 5 sessions of reshoots, which is like, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign. And watching the movie, you can tell. You can tell that this movie has been reshot and re-edited probably so many times because it is not only is it overstuffed. I mean, James Wan, I think, doubles down everything that I disliked about the original movie, but it just feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be. Like, tonally, it's all over the place. It's all over the place. It's sometimes it's a buddy cop movie with Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson. Other times it's like we're gonna kind of make this like a horror movie. It's a plot. It's a revenge story of Black Manta, but then it's not gonna be because Black Manta, his whole arc is gonna be undercut because he gets possessed by a Scooby-Doo ghost at one point. The humor is incredibly hit and miss, mostly miss. Humorously, you can tell they are trying to constantly cut away and hide Amber Heard in the movie, who's in it more than people think. They're trying to hide Amber Heard in the movie. But what's so funny about the film is that she probably should have a bigger presence because her and Aquaman have a baby, which is like, this should then be a family story. It's about them raising their kid, and she's hardly there. There's even a scene when Jason Momoa's hanging out with Boba Fett, and he goes, the single parenthood. It's like, what are you talking about? She's in the next room. And that's when you know it's like they didn't know what they were shooting at any given moment. They were trying to figure this out. It's such a mess, and it has the worst scene and the most perfect scene that represents the DCEU, which is the cockroach burger. So I said this before, spoiler, but I don't think at this point, I'm sure you guys won't mind. But there's a joke in the movie where Aquaman, he breaks his brother Orm out of jail, and Orm is like, I hate humans, I hate them. And Aquaman's like, come on, bro, they're not all bad. They made fast food, they made beer, they're pretty cool. And at one point, there's like a cockroach that scuttles by, and Jason Momoa, he's like, oh, cockroaches, the humans love these. And Orm's like, really? And he's like, yeah, eat it. He's like, okay, and he eats it. And Jason Momoa's like tricked him, but he's like, he loves it. He's like, Jesus. And then they call back to like the final scene. Like you could have, as bad as this movie was, maybe it could have at least ended the DCU on a good note, where you could have had Henry Cavill, Gal Gadot, Jason Momoa, probably not Ezra Miller or Ray Fisher or any, those, but like a lot of, Ben Affleck come back and kind of have this nice wholesome ending where they're together and they're hanging out, like something like that. But no, it ends with, Aquaman and Orm, Jason Momoa and Patrick Wilson sitting down to eat some delicious burgers, and a cockroach scuttles by Orm, smacks that shit, grabs it, puts it on his burger, and eats it like a psychopath. And that's the final scene in the movie, and technically, Chad's the final scene in the DCEU, and that is what the DCEU was. It was a cheeseburger, a delicious burger at times, with good movies like The Suicide Squad or Wonder Woman or Shazam or Peacemaker. But that cockroach, that big juicy cockroach, Chad, that crunchy cockroach that Patrick Wilson just started munching on, that's Batman v Superman. That's Justice League. That's Suicide Squad. that's the original Aquaman. That's what it was. And I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. And so when I was driving home, I was just like, yeah, I hate this. I hate it more than the Flash. I had to admit to myself, because even in the Flash, I picked out certain scenes that I liked. I like that moment. I like this moment. I like the family stuff. I like the Michael Keaton Batman stuff, even though it's undercooked. But Aquaman is like, there's not a single goddamn scene in this movie that I like. And so that's why Aquaman is my 5th worst movie of 2023. But, Chad, it is not worse than my 4th worst movie of 2023, and that is Expendables 4, or as the title kind of spells it out, Expendables, which is like, why are we going Expendables? Why are we going for the fantastic naming scheme? That just doesn't work. Don't put the number within the word. People are gonna make fun of you. Don't do that. But they did. They did. Listen, I think on paper the idea of Expendables sounds cool. I think we can all agree. All these classic action stars from the 80s and the 90s teaming up as this group of mercenaries to take down a bad guy, probably played by another classic 80s or 90s action star. It's like, on paper, that sounds really, really cool, right? I don't think any of the Expendables films nailed that concept. I have seen almost all of them. I saw the first two. I didn't see the third one. I saw the first two, and I really disliked them. And even though I was like, oh, the concept sounds kind of fun, but they were just terrible. They were horribly written. I thought the action was bad. They have CGI blood. And it was like, why are we using CGI blood? That always looks shitty. It sucks. It didn't make any sense. I felt like a lot of the stars didn't have chemistry with each other. They just felt the need to regurgitate all of their most famous lines, whether it was Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger or Bruce Willis. It's like, what are we doing? It's just the laziest screenwriting possible. And so, even though the concept in theory on paper is cool, in execution, complete failure. As bad as those movies were, Expendables is even worse. Because at this point, half of those action stars aren't even in the franchise anymore. Some of them are dead, and some of them hate each other. And so they're like, well, we can't bring those people back. So how about instead of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, how about we get Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent? Yeah, good old 50 Cent. How about Megan Fox? Let's get her. Yeah, she's an action star, right? She was running around Transformers. I'm like, I don't think that's good. I don't think that's a good idea at all. And none of this is a good idea. It was already on life, but this feels like a movie on life support where it's like, this probably shouldn't have even happened. Honestly, you can even tell that, all right, well, we can't even get Stallone back, but then he did come back, so we have to awkwardly include him in certain scenes where clearly we filmed this like after we already shot the movie, clearly after we already had principal photography. And so this is just probably like reshoots with him. But he's not in most of the movie. I'll tell you, I'm gonna spoil the movie for you, chat. I'll spoil the movie. He's killed off early in the film. And then he miraculously comes back for no reason. He's like, it was a setup. It was all part of a ruse to take down Andy Garcia, who's also, he's an action star, I guess, who is the villain the whole time. The thing is, like, okay, like maybe at the very least, even though I've never felt like any of the action scenes in the Expendable movies were very, very good, I was like, okay, it's even though the acting is terrible, the writing is terrible, the dialogue is dog shit, maybe there'll be some cool action scenes. Like, no, it feels like so much of this movie just feels like a direct-to-DVD. Like, remember when you go to Blockbuster back in the day, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you see those action films with Steven Seagal? Look at those Steven Seagal movies, and maybe you rented it and you went back home and you watched it, and Steven Seagal was just sitting there on his fat ass, and like all this cool CGI, but not really cool, but all this CGI bullshit was happening behind him and it looked so fake. That's kind of what this movie is. It's like a theatrical version of a shitty straight to a video Steven Seagal movie. That's what this film is. And horrible. Absolutely terrible. This movie has no redeeming attributes at all. And thankfully the movie was a huge flop. They spent $100 million on this movie. And this is just the year of bloated blockbusters that had all this money thrown at them, and yet they all look like shit. And this is an Expendables, very much the case. You had $100 million, and so much of this movie looks awful, looks so fake, or is just poorly shot. Whereas you look at something like Godzilla Minus One, which had a fraction, had nearly a tenth of the budget. And had better special effects and sequences, but also at the same time had characters we all really cared about and actually had stakes. And this movie has nothing. It's an awful movie. I'm so glad this franchise is officially dead. I don't want it anymore. And they probably shouldn't have made them to begin with because they were all terrible anyway. But chat, as bad as Expendables is, it is funny enough, that was my fourth one. I just realized it. Look at that, chat. The Expendables 4, Expendables is also my fourth worst movie of 2023. I didn't even realize that. Look at that. Chat, I'm funny. That's good. I didn't even realize it. Oh, hey. It's still not as bad. Expendables is still not as bad as my third worst movie of 2023. And that movie is Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, listen, I have been aware of Five Nights at Freddy's for a long time. I've never played the games. I know that they are very, very popular, right? It's the kind of the choose your own adventure game where you're at a kind of abandoned like Chuck E. Cheese-esque place, Five Nights at Freddy's. You got to watch all these cameras because, on certain nights, the animatronics come to life and they try to kill you. It's like a very simple, concept. But I'm like, that's fun. Like, again, on paper, the idea of being a security guard and an abandoned arcade with evil, possessed animatronics that walk around and try to kill you, that sounds like a good time. That sounds like that could be like a fun, gory, action-packed horror film where we're actually invested in the character and want them to escape and have them battle the animatronics one by one until dawn, until it's morning, right? That's like, I'm there for. I'm there for it. That sounds cool. That's not what this movie is. That's not what this movie is at all. Now, listen, I haven't played the game, but I'm hoping that the game is a little more interesting than this actual film. We follow Josh Hutcherson, who plays that security guard, who's this troubled, kid. Really troubled. I always call him a kid because he looks like he's like 12, but he's like 37 at this point. But Josh Hutcherson, he plays that security guard. And he freaked out on a dad at a mall because he thought that this guy was kidnapping a kid. Wasn't kidnapping a kid, and this is due to many issues because of the fact that his little brother was abducted years earlier by Matthew Lillard. Spoiler, doesn't matter. And ever since then, he's never really forgiven himself, and he's always been just really, really anxiety-ridden and clearly has many emotional and mental issues. Well, he freaked out. Funny enough, he goes to Matthew Lillard, who offers him a job to work at Five Nights at Freddy Fazbear's, whatever the hell, the fucking Freddy's. He goes to Freddy's and proceeds to do nothing. That's the thing. Like, so much of this movie is like nothing happening. For like long stretches of time, long periods of time. It's just Josh Hutcherson sitting down and falling asleep and having these dream sequences over and over and over again dreaming about him when his little brother was abducted by Matthew Lillard and how he feels guilty. And he wakes up. He's like, I fell asleep. And then it's the next night. And I'm just like, what are we doing? And eventually, the animatronics, they do start to move around. They do start to do stuff, but nothing cool, really. Nothing cool at all. Like, they kill some people earlier in the film, like at the end of the third act, the first third, I should say. And, but they're just like these bloodless kills. Like, the movie's PG-13. I'm just like, you have killer animatronics. You gotta have them be gory and fun and over the top, and they're just doing these, they're hardly doing anything at all. They constantly cut away from the kills. They obscure the kills. You might see a little blood. Something might be implied, but you don't really see anything. And the fact that they're just it's just lit, so you constantly see them, so there's no sense of dread or terror or any scares. Just like, all right, well, there he is. He's coming at me. I guess maybe I should move. It's like, no, because the characters are all stupid. That's the other thing, too. The characters are either all stupid or, and this is most of the time, they are just there to regurgitate lore. They're there to regurgitate lore and exposition. And I'm sorry, but that's not good storytelling. You don't sit two characters down and one just sits there just staring at you dead-eyed while the other one, without any flashbacks, without any like additional imagery, just talks at you about the history of something. It's like, that is not interesting. That is boring. And so much of this movie it's nearly 2 hours of exposition. Later on, they're just kind of hanging out with the animatronics, making a fucking fort. It was like, am I supposed to be scared? Is this what's happening? And then that, like, well, Matthew Lillard's obviously the bad guy because they keep talking about someone who's really bad, and he was only in the beginning of the film, so, well, there's no one else left at this point, so he asked me, and it's him, and he does a Scream reference and stuff, but that's really it. And I don't get it. I really don't understand the popularity of the franchise. Like, maybe the moment gameplay, sure, but the lore is so stupid. It's so dull. And but those fans came out in force. This is one of the most commercially successful movies this year. It's one of the most commercially successful horror films this year. I mean, made more money than great horror films like Talk to Me or Evil Dead Rise or probably Megan. Probably other films too. And it's just like this. And my fear is that because of the popularity, I mean, they're going to make more. There's no doubt. But now they're going to be like, now it's going to be just an era of shitty Five Nights at Freddy's like knockoff movies. or things that are borrowing the sensibilities of Five Nights at Freddy's. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to. Oh, God damn it! Because we've had the last few years have been pretty good for horror, whether it be bringing back old franchises or starting new ones or just one-off films. Like, we've gotten several great years with horror chat from the 2010s and the 2010s, and I'm very scared that something like this being so successful, it's going to lead to maybe like another possible dark age for horror, where like the 2000s. You had something like the torture porn or the ghost genres just dominate and just do the same things over and over and over again. So I'm a little worried about that, but we'll see. But at the end of the day, this movie is terrible, and it's my third worst movie. Yeah, I had to snort you. I had some mucus. I was just disgusted to. There we go. There we go. I swallowed it. This is the third worst movie of 2023. But it is not the second worst movie of 2023. And the second worst movie of 2023 is You People. No, not You People. You People. The film written and directed by Kenya Barris, who apparently is this celebrated comedic filmmaker of a multitude of TV shows like Blackish and Black as F. And listen, I'm gonna tell you right now, I've never really understood just the fervor around this guy. Like, even before this movie, I had seen clips of and compilations of some of his work, and I'm like, I'm not really finding that funny. Again, comedy's subjective. What I may find funny, you may not find funny, and vice versa. And so going into this, I'm just like, well, I mean, it does have an all-star cast. I mean, you got Eddie Murphy, you have Jonah Hill, you got Julia Louis-Dreyfus, you have David Duchovny. I mean, you got a lot of talented, folks in this movie. And, the plot, it focuses on this, this new interracial couple, interreligious couple, where you have this, this secular Jewish man played by Jonah Hill, and this woman, this black nationalist woman, as they say in the film, played by Lauren London, and they have their two families meet up, and what this film is, over and over and over again for just 2 hours, is white people do this. Well, black people do that. And that's just what it is. Over and over and over. And then once they kind of run out of that to do, they then just start kind of making stuff up along the way. Like all this, like they're just finding reasons to be offended with each other. Where now all of a sudden, where at one point someone brings up like the Jewish family is like, oh yeah, we really love boating and sailing. It's something that we've always done for like generations. And Eddie Murphy and his wife are just like, oh, black people and boats don't mix. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? What do you mean? And then they do this long, tired, ridiculous connection like the slave trade. I'm just like, what? and that's the level of humor in this movie. That's what it just does. It's just these cringe, awkward conversations where some of the dialogue feels that kind of Judd Apatow style filmmaking. We're just going to let our actors improv now and not really say anything meaningful or truly that funny and just kind of have them riff, which I fucking hate that. I hate comedies that clearly just aren't written. Not to say that I don't like improv and comedy. Of course I do. But I respect and admire when you have a comedy film that is so well written, like a Shaun of the Dead, or I mean, Hot Fuzz, so many, a Tropic Thunder, like these, they put effort into these. Something like this has absolutely no thought put into it at all. It just focuses on stereotypes and resentment. And I got the impression from Kenya Barris, he seems to be a man who is so confident in his own arrogance and ignorance. He's a man that believes that there is no other culture outside of Los Angeles. He just strikes me as that kind of guy. It's like, I don't know what's outside that bubble, but it doesn't matter because we're inside this bubble right now. And there's just some kind of really weird, gross things that he puts in this movie. I mean, there's like a lot of, I got the vibe that there's like a lot of anti-Semitism in this film, especially how he portrays like Jewish people in the movie, and like bringing up, like, he just presents these like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that just go unchallenged in the movie. The idea that like Jews are the ones that controlled the slave trade. I'm just like, what the fuck is going on? And I find that offensive. And also doesn't help that it doesn't even feel like a movie. So much of it just feels like a sitcom. Like the editing in between scenes, it just feels like, it's kind of like, let's put some crazy artwork in between the scene and kind of have the camera go, what? And then we just go to like the next scene. It's like, what the fuck was that? It's like, this guy is not a filmmaker. He doesn't have an eye for theatrical filmmaking whatsoever. I mean, hell, I don't think he even has the talent to be a TV writer or a TV filmmaker, to be quite honest. But yeah, I really dislike this movie. I kept forgetting about this film because I had so much hatred for it. I was like, oh yeah, I saw that movie. That's right. But man, for the longest time, this is my number one. I was like, I don't know how you're going to beat this. It's going to be very, very difficult. Like there's really nothing worse than a bad comedy, because when you don't find something funny, it just feels longer. It just sits with you, just stew in it, and you just resent it just more and more and more. But I have to admit to myself, I don't think You People is the worst movie of 2023. The worst movie, chat. My number one worst film of 2023 is Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 1, and heavy emphasis on that colon, chat, a Child of Fire. Who's the Child of Fire? I don't know. They didn't tell me. They told me a lot in this movie. They keep sitting us down for 10-minute sequences of long exposition and backstory in between scenes of just recruiting these people in slow motion as we go from world to world and planet to planet, where we get an action scene. It's like, hey, that was pretty cool what you just did. You want to join us and fight the not Empire? And I go, well, I got nothing better to do, might as well. And then proceed to do nothing. I'm getting ahead of myself. I gotta explain the plot. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, we focus on this young farmhand who wants to go up against the Empire after their life is changed forever. They then recruit a dashing smuggler, a light sword wielding warrior, a hermit. I mean, everything across it's Star Wars. What this movie just does over and over and over again is rip off better science fiction and fantasy properties. And listen, everyone rips each other off. Everyone rips each other. George Lucas ripped off Dune. So and so ripped off this thing. Everyone borrows. Everyone steals. My thing is, make it good. Tell a great story with these things that you took. And Zack Snyder's incapable of that. He can't do it. He can't do it to save his fucking life. He hasn't been able to do it for decades. And because he has become one of the most obnoxious, self-indulgent egomaniacs in the film industry. This is a guy who is so high on his own fumes that he is so obsessed with terrible aspects of filmmaking, from slow motion to gratuitous word vomit exposition, to just generic action sequences, that he's not capable of telling a coherent or compelling story in any capacity. Like, I was gonna, like, as much as a fan of, I like some of Zack Snyder's films. I like Dawn of the Dead. I like 300. I like Owls of Ga'Hoole. Outside of that, I can't say I'm a fan. And I think as he's, as he's gotten older and he's made more movies, he has not heard criticism. If anything, he seems like he's more emboldened by his fan base. And because they like so much of what he does, all the things that he indulges in, which is the slow motion, the exposition, the self-seriousness, the self-serious and mopey stoic characters that all feel the same. Like, even if he was, which he is, even ripping off Star Wars, Seven Samurai, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, it's everything. You Battle Beyond the Stars. There's at least 24 better science fiction fantasy films that he steals from and rips off. But at the very least, have fun with them. Change them up a little bit. And he just doesn't. He just literally just creates the Zack Snyder version of things that we've seen before, better things that we've seen before. Whether it be Maz Eisley Cantina, whether it be Luke Skywalker, whether it be Darth Vader or Emperor Palpatine or Obi-Wan Kenobi or Chewbacca or anyone. And it's just awful. And then the thing that probably, and this is the reason why, because for the longest time, I'll admit, I was like, okay, it's between this and you people. And the reason why this went above you people in the end, it was for this main reason, is because I believe Zack Snyder and Netflix are participating in a grift. And that is what I dubbed the big lie, which is the big lie of the Snyder Cut, the Snyder Cut phenomenon, which of course we've seen over the course of, the last half of his career, where they put out a theatrical version, the fans demand his true version, whatever it may be, and it's released. Like Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition. The Zack, the most egregious one being the Justice League film, the Zack Snyder's Justice League cut, right? But now that dominated the pop culture zeitgeist for so many years, although it did come about naturally, I will say that, I feel like he has honed in on that, Netflix has honed in on that, and they are now trying to manufacture that controversy, where they put out a film that, because this is part one of a 2-part story apparently, and they put out a version that has an hour of footage taken away that's been edited out, and probably has resulted in why it's so nonsensical and so terrible to begin with. And now they're saying like, oh, don't you worry though, because we're going to release the director's cut later in 2024, right when the part 2 comes out, and then we're going to do a director's cut of part 2. It's like, why are you doing that? Like for theatrical, it's like, well, you don't want to put out such a long movie because there's less, you can have less screenings of it. Like I understand that makes sense, but why are you doing it this way? This is a streaming movie. You have a limited theatrical release for this film. This is only in 4 cities around the world. And so what should it matter how many times or screens? It doesn't make any sense. And I think they are trying to manufacture this to keep this, to artificially create hype and excitement and fervor and toxicity around this film franchise. They are trying to manufacture a film franchise in the worst ways possible. And I think that could potentially lead to some disastrous things. This idea of like, oh, don't worry, we're going to put out this version, but later I'll put out the other version. And who's to say? Who's to say that like, well, yeah, you can watch that version in, how many months, but, you can watch it early if you pay us $1. Pay us this amount, raise your subscription. I feel like this is going to have an effect. And I think the streaming services are getting more bold. They are charging more for their services, even though they're producing less content or taking content away. And I think it has the potential to go that way. And if that's the case, if Netflix and Zack Snyder are participating in that, then that is something that can have such a profoundly negative effect on the filmmaking process in the film industry. Like, to me, that's scary, where it's going to gouge customers. And it just happens to all be around just a shitty fucking sci-fi film, which is even more annoying. So yeah, this movie is terrible. Not only is it a ripoff, but the fact that they are engaging in this faux controversy is downright disgusting to me. And Netflix and Zack Snyder should be ashamed of themselves for trying to create something like this and for creating something like Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. Who's the Child of Fire? They don't say. I don't know, chat. But that, my friends, is my top 10 worst movies of 2023. And my honorable mentions. But what about you guys? What are your worst movies of 2023? What are your worst honorable mentions of this year? Do we have some similarities? Do you have some differences? Did you like some of these movies? Did you hate some of these movies as much as I did? Please go ahead and let me know.